Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. There's not a morning that goes by that we don't see some story about the impact of social media, the power of Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. With all of that, it's easy to forget the power of television, its impact on our lives growing up, how it shaped us, its power today, and what it has wrought with respect to our politics. As a reminder of just how powerful it is, let's listen to Howard Beale.
So, a rich little man with white hair died. What has that got to do with the price of rice, right? And why is that woe to us? Because you people and 62 million other Americans are listening to me right now. Because less than 3% of you people read books. Because less than 15% of you read newspapers. Because the only truth you know is what you get over this tube. Right now, there is an entire generation that never knew anything that didn't come out of this tube. This tube is the gospel, the ultimate revelation. This tube can make or break presidents, popes, prime ministers. This tube is the most awesome goddamn force in the whole godless world. And woe is us if it ever falls into the hands of the wrong people. And that's why woe is us. And when the 12th largest company in the world controls the most awesome goddamn propaganda force in the whole godless world, who knows what shit will be peddled for truth on this network? So you listen to me. Listen to me. Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So if you want the truth, go to God. Go to your gurus. Go to yourselves, because that's the only place you're ever going to find any real truth. But man, you're never going to get any truth from us. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We lie like hell. We'll tell you that Kojak always gets the killer and that nobody ever gets cancer in Archie Bunker's house. And no matter how much trouble the hero is in, don't worry, just look at your watch. At the end of the hour, he's going to win. We'll tell you any shit you want to hear. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off.
And we turn our attention to television now as I'm joined by James Poniewozik. He's been the chief television critic for the New York Times. He previously was the television and media critic for Time magazine and a media columnist for Salon. It is my pleasure to welcome James Poniewozik here to the program to talk about his new book, Audience of One, Donald Trump, Television and the Fracturing of America. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. Did Patty Chayefsky get it about right?
Howard Beale was an angry man. He was an angry man, but he did make some good points. I'd say, obviously I am a professional television critic. I am not in this line of work because I hate it. I'm not a masochist. I think there are, great things about and on television now. But, the point that Network was making back in the 1970s is very much true and even more amplified now that, particularly when it comes to TV as a means of communication and a means of delivering news and public discourse being carried out through the business of TV, you have a tendency to turn whatever excites and, angers and works people up the most. That has, in retrospect, that 20th century period when Network came out kind of seems like a a blissful period of quiet in the culture
Right.
compared to what you have now in the 24-hour media environment.
And one of the overriding points you make is that in order to understand Trump today and what we're going through, it's really important to understand the power of television.
Yeah. Number one, because Donald Trump, as a person, as a personality, is basically a being made of television. That is, he has been a pop culture figure in America for some 40 years. He has always cultivated and courted celebrity, even before he really did much of note in his real estate business. He has thrived in the media atmosphere. He realized that, in a media culture, it's important to be seen and noticed and kind of become the media symbol of a thing in order to leverage that into other enterprises. In order to understand how all the political and cultural forces that led to the moment that we're in now, so many of which came through the media and television news and polarized political media, these forces which made it possible for Donald Trump to go from tabloid figure in the 80s to reality host in the early 21st century to president of the United States, those forces are so many of them are products of the business of television, and you need to understand the business of television and how it changed over that time to fully understand what our society's become.
And within the context of how it evolved and how it changed, Trump in so many ways achieved a kind of symbiosis with television and with the way it was evolving.
Not only was he somebody who always loved television and loved being on television and, monitoring his coverage on television, as we can see, now today with his constant watching of cable news. He was somebody who really intuitively and instinctively understood how the medium operated. That a television camera always wants something new. It wants something exciting. It wants a flashier, more provocative, more sensationalistic performance. It wants a more, a spectacular thing than you gave it the last time. And he, was always, long before his political career, instinctively ready and willing to put on that show. He really, I think much of his sort of prodigious success at making himself a media omnipresence comes from the fact that, he really sort of instinctively thinks like a TV camera.
Right. I mean, he always manages to find a way to keep the focus on him, to make sure that he gets the red light, as you talk about.
This was a thing that Donald Trump said in an interview shortly after he was elected about his campaign. He said that at his rallies, he often wouldn't pay attention to the people at the rallies because it was easy enough to excite the crowd. If the crowd's energy flagged, you would just say something like "build the wall" and or "lock her up," and they'd cheer. But he said, if he sensed the energy in the arena waning too much, he said, I would always say something new to keep the red light on. And what that means is the red lights of the live TV cameras that are carrying your rally live on cable television. And, the shining of the red light proves that you are interesting and worthy of attention, and giving cable news, that cable news machine, the new exciting things that it is hungry for in order to keep attention on you. And I think even as much of a cliche as the power of television is in our society, I think he, as principally a media star rather than a politician who was sort of coached by media handlers, was really able to wholly understand and embody the notion that attention is the rocket fuel of a campaign, and even bad attention is better than no attention.
In that regard, is it about him telling a story? Is it about creating a narrative in which he is the protagonist, or is it just about those moments?
It's about moments more than narrative, I would say. In other words, it is very much, I think you hit upon something important by saying the word protagonist, because I do think that, one thing that 2016 showed with a tremendous amount of free media that Donald Trump got in, cable news and elsewhere that did a great deal to elect him. It is very important to be the center of attention because that makes you the protagonist of the campaign. It makes you the person who the stories are about. Everything is about either you or how other people are reacting to you and so forth. But that's different from necessarily telling a crafted narrative. I sometimes describe it as the difference between a movie and a movie trailer, right? Like you go to the movie sometimes and you watch a trailer, and it's not necessarily narrative, but it's a series of explosions and excitements and moments that tell you you're going to be excited all the time if you see this. And that it was really sort of the communication style, and is of Donald Trump. It is not necessarily, a seamless, sensible narrative arc so much as it is explosion, 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 that gives TV that new exciting thing that keeps its focus on you.
But could Trump have happened without the sort of simultaneous rise of the anti-hero within television, whether it's Tony Soprano or Walter White or Don Draper or the Kardashians for that matter? Without that base, could Trump have done what he did?
I think there were a lot of factors that had to change from 1980 when Rona Barrett asked a young Donald Trump if he would ever run for president, and he said he didn't think he could because somebody polarizing like him couldn't get elected in a television culture, until you got to the point where television essentially elected him. And one thing that we saw between then and now was as television moved from sort of a sedate three-network medium with a lot of inoffensive programming, you had the rise of HBO and of cable and of popular TV antiheroes like Tony Soprano and Walter White on Breaking Bad. The notion of the character who is maybe rough-edged, maybe an out-and-out villain, but they're also charismatic and fascinating to watch, and you can't take your eyes off them. These shows like 24 that kind of took this idea and turned it into an entertainment whose thesis is it's an ugly, dangerous world, and sometimes you got to do ugly things to get ahead. Now all of this, I don't think that Donald Trump necessarily consciously modeled himself on this kind of figure. Really, the public persona that he had already created through the 80s and 90s as sort of the shark deal maker of business was kind of this figure before the Tony Sopranos and Walter Whites of the world. And what that does, once that archetype is out in the popular culture and people have spent some time sort of acculturated to that, and following and rooting for those heroes, it creates a different kind of story that a political candidate can tell. It creates a different kind of archetype that you can sell yourself as. You don't necessarily have to position yourself as Honest Abe anymore. You don't necessarily have to give lip service to morality and position yourself as, a caring, warm-hearted, empathetic person, whatever your other qualities are. You can go out, as Trump often did in his rallies, and basically make the argument, we're living in medieval times, and terrorists are coming to kill you, and people are swarming over the border to take your jobs and commit crimes, and this horrible thing is happening, that horrible thing is happening, and if we are on the verge of this catastrophe that's going to threaten the life that you've always known, what does it matter if the president is nice? He basically sold himself for the presidency as an anti-hero.
And the genius is that he always stays in character, that he creates this TV character that embodies who he is.
And part of the reason for that is, it's important to note that Donald Trump is very much a performer. He was on The Apprentice on NBC for 14 seasons. But being a reality TV performer is a very different thing from being, say, a movie actor like Ronald Reagan was. That is to say, you are not sort of cultivating an empathy for fictional characters and, trying to put yourself in the position of another person or another character that you're trying to play. Playing yourself on reality TV is being you, but more, but, exaggerated. You highlight the aspects of you that are most controversial and provocative and that get you the most attention, and that therefore, keep the focus on you, keep you the center of the story. It is very much a, kind of egocentric medium. It's not about imagining yourself in the place of others, but presenting yourself as you. And so once you've sort of been trained in the media and had this history of playing yourself flamboyantly for the cameras, you don't break character, because what you're doing is sort of single-mindedly being an exaggerated version of yourself in the way that gets you the most attention.
You mentioned Reagan. I mean, that's the interesting contrast. Looking at Reagan on the one side and Trump on the other is really the history of the evolution of television.
It really is. Reagan, in addition to being a movie actor, was a TV presenter for General Electric. He came up through Hollywood first and then had to rise through the Republican ranks in order to be in a position where he could run for president. Unlike Donald Trump, who went straight from hosting The Celebrity Apprentice to announcing his run for the presidency. I think I found it very interesting working on the book to see that Donald Trump was basically emerging as a national media figure around 1980, right around the time that Ronald Reagan was running for president. And one thing that's, a difference in their campaigns that I think reflects the difference in the media environments that they ran in was that when Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980, he had, some of the questions about him were, is he too tough, too belligerent, too warlike? And he, in this sort of more moderate, homogeneous media environment, in order to get elected, he had to also present a kind of avuncular, good-natured, good-humored, soft side in order to get people comfortable with him. Move ahead to 2016, and it's a very different performance that you're giving to, appeal to your base in the Fox Newses of the world, and to keep that, hungry 24-hour red light of the electronic media on you. So, I think that, the differences between them, they're not just differences in style and personality. They really are a picture of how much the culture has changed through the changes in media over the last 40 years.
What role did talk radio play in setting the stage for the way television did some of this?
One of the things that Ronald Reagan did as president was eliminate something called the Fairness Act, which governed broadcast communications, which was basically a rule that if you used the public airwaves, if you were a broadcast TV or radio station, and you aired a political viewpoint, you had to provide a balancing political viewpoint for it. With that gone, that enabled the rise of political talk radio, which was especially effective on the conservative side. So you had Rush Limbaugh and so forth becoming major figures in the late 80s and early 90s. And what that did, in part, not only did that sort of help create a polarized political audience that got used to hearing, getting all this red meat from their favorite personalities, but it provided a model once Roger Ailes, the former Nixon media guru, founded Fox News in 1996. Where he very much went into that with the attitude, and cable, by the way, is not regulated by the government in the way that the broadcast airwaves are, so you are free to be, to have whatever content you want on it. And his idea was, we're basically going to do conservative talk radio for television. And that was great. It was very successful politically, as we've seen, in, basically giving Fox now a kind of stranglehold on the Republican base and the way it thinks and what its concerns are. And it was very successful as business. And part of the reason for that is that the business model of cable TV, which is 24 hours, is that you have to make your audience excited about the news, even at times when there's no news going on. And one of the big ways to do that is with opinion and controversy and picking political fights. At a place like Fox News, which cultivated an engaged political audience that really wanted that stuff, it's an endlessly renewable resource. So, and talk radio really paved the way for that.
They were also the mean guys of television in the early days. People like Joe Pyne, Morton Downey Jr., that really set a predicate for a certain kind of behavior.
Yeah, this is all a continuum. Nothing in popular culture kind of leaps out fully formed, brand new. It's like an evolutionary chain in nature. And, I definitely think through the 80s, you are particularly seeing, various models of how you can be successful with. Whereas earlier in television aimed for a thing called the least objectionable program, which is basically, put things on the air that don't give people a reason to change the channel. You could also be successful with controversy and things that worked people up and made them mad. And, various models for that, certainly in the explosion of talk TV in the 80s, were folks like Morton Downey Jr., Jerry Springer, even the early version of Oprah in some ways before Oprah became, a more kind of inspirational TV host. It all kind of reflected this, truth in especially nonfiction TV that fights create ratings. Fighting was really part of the Donald Trump brand from the beginning, and that was something that translated very well, it turned out, to television.
There was also a way that Trump understood this idea of least objectionable programming. I mean, it's no accident that among people in the 2016 election that didn't like either candidate, that they broke for Trump, that he became the least objectionable, and somehow he understood that.
Yeah, and I think that there were a lot of factors behind that. One was, an overarching theme of the 2016 election was that essentially no one, including Trump's own campaign, necessarily believed he was actually going to win. So for some people, it seemed like, a free vote. And for others, I think that, and I think this is a thing that political pundits sort of missed in this election, Trump's very outrageousness and his, objectionableness to much of the audience and to the traditional political establishment and so on, became a calling card for some people. In other words, people had various motives for voting for Donald Trump, but with I think some of these undecided voters that broke late, the show that they were seeing on TV convinced them, okay, this is the biggest, most radical change. Why not vote for this guy from TV who everybody says is so shocking and do something really different and see what happens?
There's also a sense and understanding of, and that pundits also missed, that ideology didn't matter, that you could be famous for being famous.
Yeah, and that, and again, political, presidential elections are huge things. 62 some million people voted for Trump, and certainly some of them were probably just Republicans who wanted conservative Supreme Court justices or whatever. But I think among the core of his support that made a difference from him, one thing that he took advantage of, and that I think that cable news and the electronic media have really helped promote and build, is the idea that politics is more about sort of affect and emotion for a lot of people than it is ideology. It's not necessarily, what's your particular, policy on this tax issue or that healthcare issue. It's, are you going to fight for my side? Are you going to, attack my enemies and make the people that I don't like upset? Do I like your style? Does the way that you speak and, the punches that you throw on stage kind of resonate with something that I'm mad about or dissatisfied with in my own life? And I think that for a lot of Trump voters, this television theater of the way he conducted his campaign, that was the message in itself. Another big refrain, I think, of a lot of the punditry on the 2016 election was that Trump was hurting himself by getting into pointless fights, attacking John McCain, attacking random Republican opponents who weren't really threats to him on the debate stage. And I think what they missed, but what you would understand if you watched more reality TV, is that the fight is the point. The point of the fight is to show that you're a fighter, to say to your audience, look at these people I'm attacking. They're too bound by traditional proprieties and norms, and they can't even defend themselves. How can you expect them to defend you? Vote for me. I'm the street fighter in this brawl.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about how television, as it has evolved, as we're talking about it today, exists side by side with social media and the relationship between the two.
There's definitely a symbiosis between them. I think in the long run, culturally, the internet and social media might become a much bigger force that eventually, supplants or overshadows television. But I think what we've seen certainly in the Trump era is that, the way Trump used Twitter was often essentially to program television. He would tweet something outrageous or inflammatory, and that would become news. And then he would tweet about that, and that tweet would become news, and it would sort of build this cycle. Conversely, while a lot of people now say get their news from Facebook or Twitter, a lot of that is essentially programmed by 24-hour television news. You might not watch a Rudy Giuliani interview on CNN, but it will show up in your Facebook or Twitter feed nonetheless. So in many ways, although social media is a competitor to television, I think, right now, particularly in politics, it's often serving as a force multiplier and an amplifier for it. And it's also a really helpful medium, a really useful medium for celebrities and politicians who like to, manage their own publicity, which is something that Donald Trump has always loved to do, going back to the 80s when he would, call up reporters and pretend to be John Barron, spokesman for Donald Trump. On Twitter, he can be his own press secretary all the time.
Finally, talk a little bit about where we go from here. It is arguable that Trump is kind of the apogee of all that we've been talking about with respect to reality television and where television is today. What's the reaction to it? What comes next for television and politics?
Sometimes television, like politics, tends to be cyclical and a pendulum. A trend gets overexposed in television and people burn out on it and they, retreat to something that's sort of the opposite of it. It is entirely possible that at least for a while after the Trump presidency, whether it's, another 1 year or 5 years, that, people turn to something that is a more soothing, boring kind of presentation. But long term, unless something really shifts technologically or culturally, I think that, political media is only going to get more excitable and sensationalistic because that is the kind of discourse that, a fragmented, polarized kind of niche media rewards and cultivates. So, I don't think it's I think it's a mistake to look at our political discourse right now and say, well, it's all about Donald Trump, and, once Donald Trump is no longer president, things will be back to normal. In a way, Donald Trump is just sort of an extreme manifestation of what has become normal in our politics and media culture, and I think that those forces, exist whether he's president or not.
James Poniewozik. His book is Audience of One: Donald Trump, Television, and the Fracturing of America. James, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.